Hey, legend, I hope you're doing well. Today on the episode, we have Dr. Robert Glover. If you haven't heard about this man, he's one of the godfathers of the men's movement and men's health and personal development in this space. It was an absolute honor to have him on. If you haven't heard of him already and you haven't read No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is his flagship book, you must go and get that. It is an absolute essential for your reading. I've read and listened to it multiple times, and every time I do, it blows my mind how easy it is for me to slip back into my nice guy syndromes. If you feel like you're too nice and not getting everything that you want in your life, then this episode is for you. Welcome, Robert. What an absolute pleasure and an honor. I've obviously been in the world of men's groups since I was pretty young, and your book and your work has been pivotal for every man that I've ever met. It's like recommended reading, no matter if I'm in the Mankind Project or if I'm in Vancouver in a different men's group. Like it's everywhere. So I just really appreciate your work first and foremost.
Thank you for the invitation. I should have already asked. Should I call you Josh, JD, Joshua?
Man, whatever you want. Yeah.
No, you tell me.
Like.
No nice guy stuff here. You tell me what you want me to call you. I don't let people get away with that.
Yeah, Josh. Call me Josh.
Josh, that works great. Right, good to be here, Josh.
Thanks, man. So let's start there. What is a nice guy? Just in a really quick, maybe 30-second summary.
All right. The quick little elevator pitch is a nice guy. And, we're speaking to men, but this applies to women as well, but I'll speak primarily to men. A nice guy is a man who at a very early age inaccurately internalized an emotional belief that there's something wrong with him. He's not okay. He's not good enough, not lovable. And from that belief at an emotional level, he began trying to figure out how to be what he could be so that he'd get loved and liked and his needs met, and hide whatever about him might get a negative reaction from the people around him. And then that gets solidified through adolescence, brought into adulthood. So a nice guy's walking around with this paradigm that says there's something wrong with me, even though he may have that. That's called toxic shame. He may have that really way pressed down to where he's not conscious of it. Some nice guys are very conscious of it. We can talk more about that. But they believe I've got to become something different. I've got to be this way with this person to have their approval, this way with that person to have their approval, and I better hide all of this from them, because I might get rejected, I might get shamed, I might get abused, I might get left. And so nice guys are basically chameleons. They're walking around, checking which way the wind's blowing and figuring out how do I need to be in this particular situation. And so because of that, nice guys aren't particularly authentic. They're not true to themselves. Often they don't know who their true self is. And as I talk about in No More Mr. Nice Guy, very early in the book, nice guys are often anything but nice, primarily because of this inauthenticity that tends to show up in their life paradigm.
Absolutely. And if I was, those are quite some deep topics about not loving myself and not being comfortable with myself. But what are some key things that it would bring my awareness to go, oh wow, actually I am a nice guy, and if I'm unaware?
Constant approval seeking is a pretty common trait. I want them to like me. I want them to like me, and you realize you're kind of adapting yourself to situations. Depending, you might be this way at work, this way with friends, this way around women. So that's one way to notice, and that's where it really shows up for straight nice guys is with women. Even gay nice guys I know often will fall into that. How do I have the woman's approval, even though they're not seeking a sexual relationship with them? So it really tends to show up with women culturally for most nice guys. Another really clear tendency is nice guys' tendency to get resentful and frustrated, and then repress that because you're nice. You're not supposed to get frustrated and resentful, rageful. No, none of that. So resentment is a common trait within nice guys. We can talk more about why that is, but it's linked to what I call covert contracts, where we're doing for everybody else. And hey, how come they're not doing back for me? So we start resenting that. So not living up to your full potential is a pretty common trait with nice guys, because we tend to be somewhat risk adverse. We go along to get along. Another trait for nice guys, here's one thing that I often say. Often when a nice guy contacts me or walks into my office or comes to a workshop, often they have one of the three P's, sometimes all three of them. Procrastination, real common trait in nice guys. Put off doing what's really important and put off doing what we're passionate about. Pornography, it's a really common trait among nice guys. And then purpose, lack of it. Most nice guys say, I don't live with purpose and passion.
Mm.
So that's just kind of a handful of traits that, may not see in every single nice guy, but they're pretty common in most nice guys.
Yeah, I love that. And when you say you call it a recovering nice guy, it sounds like we're addicts. Is that, have you seen people come back to that as if they are addicts? Could you expand on that a little bit?
You know, that's a good point. And sometimes I realize that word recovering, and I refer to myself as a recovering nice guy. And I began my journey, my process, actually in a 12-step group for sex addicts, and mainly because my then wife was telling me, "You're a sex addict. You need to go get help." I go, "Well, just because I want to have sex with you doesn't make me a sex addict." She didn't want to have sex after we got married, um, and so I got there and found out I wasn't a sex addict. But for the first time in my life, I had a safe place, all men, to start revealing me and talking about me and releasing that shame that I'd carried around. So I'd start going to these meetings and I'd get excited. They were like, 5:30 in the morning. And I'd go think, yeah, I get to go reveal things I've never told anybody before. And it felt so liberating. So, I liked it. It felt good. So in that way, I was recovering from the layers that I'd taken on that I believed I had to carry around, both layers of protection. How do I guard me to not be found out, to not get hurt, to not be vulnerable, and shedding, even my offensive weaponry. What I used to make sure people didn't get too close to me, or if they hurt me, how I got them back. And so I was recovering from all that stuff I've been packing along with me. And again, we can dive further into this, but all of that stuff goes back really early in not in life to the things that happened to us that affected our nervous system, our emotional operating system. And so I'm not recovering from a disease. I'm not recovering from anything that's bad about me. I'm recovering my true self
Mm.
and shedding that stuff I've been packing along that I thought was me that didn't serve me. Maybe it served me when I was very young and I had no other resources. But so I'm recovering from what I took on that I don't need anymore. And as I mentioned, because what I've found, I've been working at this for about 30 years now. I just turned 68 back in December. So yeah, I've been at this for a little while. And, I kind of think, well, I should be done. I shouldn't be having any more of these nice guy reactions. But the piece that I've really learned, especially over the last 10, 15 years, is that my way of being in the world as a nice guy was tied into my nervous system and going just to the core of my being, usually manifested in anxiety and shame. The shame is I don't want to be found out. I don't want to get in trouble. The anxiety is just fear of anything that might be out of my control or might happen that feels like I did when I was a helpless little child and things got triggered. So one reason why it's probably a lifelong process, maybe for many, maybe not everybody. Excuse me. That lifelong process is that it's wired so deeply into our nervous system.
Mm.
It's below conscious brain. It's down here, And so I just tell guys, you may be doing this the rest of your life, but that's okay. It's not that it's going to control you the rest of your life. You may just get to be the watcher of it, the noticer of it for the rest of your life.
Mm, absolutely. And what do you feel like are some really common, I guess we'll use the addict terminology, like relapses that a lot of guys fall back into? Like, what are kind of the most common that you see?
You know, well, let's kind of keep digging back into the fundamentals
Mm.
of nice guy syndrome, and then we'll move it forward into that addiction model. Um, when I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, I consciously did not use the term codependent, primarily at that time, because I started writing it 30 years ago. And at that time, the only books on codependency were aimed at two targets. One, partners and family members of addicts, usually alcoholics, drug addicts, and typically women. because at that time culturally kind of codependency was seen kind of as a female, because women are nice, they want to help everybody, they want everybody to like them, kind of thing. um, at least that's the way it was 30 years ago. Maybe it's not so much that way anymore. And so all the books, all the stuff was written either towards women or partners in addictive systems. And so I didn't use the word codependent, even though I was very familiar with I was familiar with PMLity and, all the terminology coming out of the addictive world. I wanted a kind of a fresh look for men. I didn't want people to just pick up the first word they see as codependent and they go, "Oh, that's not me. That's women. That's addicts." So I didn't use the term. But nice guy syndrome is fundamentally codependency. Now, to kind of help understand what codependency is, another term that you don't hear used that often, but I actually really like the term a lot, is the term borrowed functioning. Codependency is borrowed functioning,
Mm.
meaning as a person in a codependent state, I only have meaning. I only have existence. I only have value. I only have purpose in terms of my relationship to you. So, for example, you and I have a relationship. You reached out to me and said, come, on my show. I'm coming on your show, and I'll get value out of that as well because I get to talk about my books and my work, and I get to help people. If we have a really clear relationship, and you and I even clarified some things before we got started. You sent me an email clarifying things before we got started. That's a clear boundaried relationship. Whereas a codependent borrowed function relationship doesn't have that clarity. And it'd be like, your only value would come from getting Dr. Glover to come on your podcast. And if you can't get Dr. Glover on your podcast, you have no value as a podcaster. And now that you've got me, you have value until that goes away and you have to, get somebody else. And it'd be for like me is I only have value if people like Josh invite me to come on their podcast. Because if I don't get invited on podcasts, I have no, that's borrowed functioning. See, we have to have each other to have some sense of self and some self of identity. Now, we kind of be playful with it, talking about this kind of relationship, but it's usually operating at a very unconscious level in most intimate relationships, which can be true in the workplace as well, even though we might not consider that, intimate. And that is, I only have value, I only have identity, I only have worth, I only have purpose in terms of what I get from you. Now, for most codependents, most nice guys, we often need somebody who needs us, who needs fixing, who has problems in their life, who has chaos, who has drama. We need that to have our identity of I can help, I can fix that. You can look up to me, you can value me, you can appreciate me because I can do that. Now, another part of this borrowed functioning is around just being noticed and being appreciated and being valued. I only have value if you value me. Right? I only feel good if you appreciate me. That's all borrowed functioning, and that's the core of codependency. And it is often treated with an addiction model. There's Codependence Anonymous. Let's follow the 12 steps. There's Love and Sex Addicts Anonymous. Let's follow the 12-step model. So it is often treated kind of using that addictive model. So to back to your question, how can you relapse? I relapse all the time. I find myself, oh, I really wanted to have their approval. Oh, I wore my best shirt today, so that they would think well of me. Oh, my wife is smiling and happy today, and so I must be doing all right. Those are relapses. Now, and the reason why codependency is so much more challenging than like alcohol or drug addiction or gambling addiction. I mean, those things are really easy to track. Oh, I gambled today. Oh, I drank today. With codependency is, oh, that person smiled at me and I felt good today. Well, do I have to have strangers smile at me in order to feel good? And why do I give so much value to a stranger that I don't even know that their smile somehow gives me validity? So it is so subtle that it is so easy to not see it in the first place and or slide into it easily. And I still do. You know, if my wife has a kind of a look on her face, or if she's kind of, you know, seems detached or withdrawn, or isn't smiling or isn't talking much, I feel a hit to my nervous system. And it's a hit like, oh no, I've done something wrong. Oh no, I'm going to die. It really does feel that strong. That may not be true for every nice guy. Um, and it's not true for me with everybody. But for whatever reason, I invited a woman into my life that, you know, when she gets a certain look on her face, it triggers an anxiety. And if I go unconscious, I just slip into, you know, reactive behavior. I'll try to fix it. I'll try to make it better. I'll ask what's wrong. I'll go be playful. I'll go give her a hug. I'll go tell her I love you. Those are all codependent behaviors if they're tied into that borrowed functioning. I need you to be okay for me to be okay. Or if I know what those habitual behaviors are for me and what the trigger is, usually shame or anxiety, I can watch that when it comes up. I'll notice myself noticing, oh, she has that look on her face. Oh, she's withdrawn. Oh, I feel anxious. I'm not breathing. I'm stressed. I have this impulse to go fix, go find out, go talk her down, talk her through, talk her over. I often say those are my superpowers. I can talk any woman down, through, or over. I learned to do that with my father, actually. They're they're not good superpowers unless you're a hostage negotiator, maybe. So I can watch that now, and I can soothe myself. I can take a breath. I can ground myself. I can come back into my body. If I need to, I can give myself affirmations. So I can handle it, or I can just send love to my wife, and without any need if I got to go fix something. So it is so easy to answer your question to relapse, to fall back
Mm.
into those patterns. But if we've done the work to where we know what our patterns are and what the emotional triggers underneath them are, we can just be the watcher of that, just the noticer of it. And I may always have those kind of triggers in my nervous system. I don't know.
Mm.
Maybe I'll work through them. Maybe I picked a perfect human being to help me just work out the depth of those anxiety states. Um, but I'm okay with working on them, till the day I die,
Yeah.
if that's what I need to do.
Yeah. Okay. Could you expand on, you touched on that relief that you felt when you were going to this group of men. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of having a men's group, and the importance of having close male friends in
Oh
one's
man, we,
lives?
we, we could spend the rest of the time on that. I'm happy to talk about that. I am a big fan of men's groups, men's programs. This is the program I've launched. I believe in it because I began my own, as I said, recovery before I even knew I was a recovering nice guy. I was just going to something because my wife told me she was going to leave me if I didn't. This is my second wife, who I was married to when I actually did right, when I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy. I was just going to some program to get her off my back. I'm thinking, you're the one who's unhappy all the time. You're the one who's always in a bad mood. You're the one who's yelling all the time. You're the one who never wants to have sex anymore. How come I'm the broken one that has to go to therapy? So luckily, I found some good places. I found that 12-step group. I got with a therapist who happened to be female, and then later got with another female therapist who was leading a men's group who I was in for a number of years. The Even though I encourage men, especially recovering nice guys, if they can, to find male coaches, male mentors. I don't make that a rule because, for example, both of the therapists I had, at least starting out, female therapists, were very pro male, pro masculine,
Mm.
and that was good for me as well because I grew up during the '60s and '70s with kind of, maybe, I don't know if it's first or second wave of feminism, but it was that angry feminism. Every man's a rapist, and erection's a sign of aggression. We're just you know I grew up hearing that, and I was already trying to be different from my father. So it was actually good and therapeutic for me to work with women who valued men. And even though it may sound like external validation and still part of the nice guy syndrome, one of the benefits of being in a group, or at least being with a coach, therapist, some sort of, I call them safe people in No More Mr. Nice Guy, is when we start releasing our shame, revealing our shame. Like I said, I'd go to that 12-step group and just talk about what I never told anybody. I grew up in fundamental Christian church. I have 2 degrees in religion. I was a minister for 8 years. That environment was, don't reveal anything about you. With my father, he was so critical. Don't reveal anything. growing up, like I said, during the angry feminism, don't be like those bad men, so everything was repressed. When I started revealing, I didn't know it was toxic shame at that time, but the revealing of it and then the response of the people was what was so liberating. So I'm revealing in, a group of men, a bunch of sex addicts, that, oh, I had this thought or I had this action or I had this impulse. And, I get done, they go, thanks for sharing, Robert. That's it. Nobody, thought I was a terrible human being. And then maybe I'd go to my therapist and tell, some story, about me that I had great shame and fear to reveal. And my therapist would look at me kindly and say, well, let's explore what that might mean. I'm going, oh, you're not going to tell me I'm a terrible human being? I mean, I know that sounds kind of basic, but I was in my 30s before, I started revealing me. So when I was in private practice in the Seattle area, for several years, I was leading 5 men's groups a week. I still do workshops, especially small group workshops where guys can come to my home here and, 8, 10 guys and have kind of a men's group experience. The real beauty of a men's group experience is for many men, they have that experience like I had in that 12-step group. I just share something about me, a vulnerability that most men culturally, we're not taught to be vulnerable. We're taught, well, that's soft, or if you reveal about you, somebody may, there's a price to pay for being vulnerable. And to reveal with other men, I procrastinate, or I'm not living up to, what I can be doing, or my marriage sucks, or I don't even know how to talk to women, or I can't stop looking at pornography. It's amazing how that one comes up so often. And it's interesting. All it takes is one person to bring up, I got an issue with pornography. All of a sudden, me too, me too, me too, me too. All of a sudden, and guys that had never even told anybody that they looked at porn are now telling complete strangers, I look at porn. And then it's kind of like we've established a bond. We're human. We're imperfect. It's okay. Let's get real. Let's support each other. And so for most men, finding out, the term I like to use, they find out they're not terminally unique. I'm not the only person walking around hiding the fact that I look at pornography. I'm not the only one, walking around afraid of my partner. I'm not the only one walking around terrified to talk to a woman I don't know. I'm not the only one walking around not living up to my full potential. And for men especially, being in that group context, it is liberating that we're letting go of shame. We start connecting with other men, which I think is essential for a man to live a full, happy life. We need a foundation of good men in our life. I didn't always have that, but every time I've gone to work at getting good men into my life, it's like my life just took off. It just, it became amazing in many ways, solely because I had good connection with men.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan, of men doing their work in a men's group. A good reason also to do it with men is, no matter how much we men work on our nice guy issues, we've been trained since birth to please women. We're trained we had to please mom. We were a dependent little infant, and we had to make mom happy. We got into school. We had to please our female teachers to get from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. Now, what's missing is that our male ancestors around age 12, the men came and took the boys out of the female system they were in, took them out, did some sort of masculine initiation, brought them into the tribe of men, and now they tended to spend most of their time with men, not with women. I mean, that's throughout all history, it's been like that. Now, boys don't have that. The men don't come take them away to be from around the women, and most of us still spend a lot of time around women. And I'm not judging that, being critical of it, but most of us never get over this, how do I please a woman? It's wired into our nervous system. So being with men, we can open up, we can reveal. We're not so worried about getting judged, criticized, shamed, because, I learned a long time ago, you can put a couple women into a seminar or workshop with men, the men clam up and the women talk, the whole time. And I thought, if men are going to open up and talk, we got to do it just with men.
Mm-hmm.
So for many, many reasons, I'm a big fan of getting men together with other men. to be vulnerable, to connect, to reveal, to support each other, to hold each other accountable. There's so much value we get from each other.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I remember very first like doing the Mankind Project, and then one of the guys that I became really close with in the I groups afterwards, like the integration groups, is one of the statements he made was like, after one of the sessions, he was like, man, I just don't even remember what life was like not having this support.
Yeah.
And I walk around and I look at other people just in the streets and I'm like, wow, how do you live like this? And remembering that he was like, how did I live like that
Yeah.
without even just knowing that someone has your back and that there's, 10 guys you could call on at any time to get any support you need is really transformational. And I think we don't realize how
Yeah.
alone we have been beforehand. We walk around the world just fully isolated, because we don't ever share those parts of ourselves. So really there's a distance. We have one or two close friends, but even that's reducing if you look at the stats, like,
Well,
most men don't have friends.
I agree 100% with you. In my own life, about 7 years ago, I just, bought a house here in Mexico. I live in Puerto Vallarta. You live in Latin America as well. I married a Mexican woman. Um, I was learning Spanish, far from fluent, but my wife doesn't speak English, so I've learned Spanish, at least the Spanish she speaks to me. Um, and I felt really isolated. I work at home, mostly on the internet. Uh, and I realized I had maybe about one and a half close friends, guy friends. And when I say a half, it's because one of them I knew I needed to move him out of my life. There was too much water under the bridge with some things he had done. And I thought, and the one friend I had was in LA and I'm in Puerto Vallarta. And so I thought, I need more men in my life. So I started seeking, and I happened to find a men's program that I joined 6 years ago. And I tell you what, if I pulled up my calendar, my Signal, my WhatsApp, my messaging threads, you would just see men I've been in communication with, texting with, on Zoom with, all week long. And easily 25 to 50 guys that have my back, that support me, that, come drop by and see me in Puerto Vallarta, or, whenever I'm in their area, I'll see them. And my life is so much more full. I'm so energized. It's helped my relationship. It's at 68 years old, when most men are retired, I'm launching new projects, writing new books. And one of my coaches, one of my certified coaches, just last night at the end of a call said, Robert, you have so much energy. It's so contagious. You have more energy than, most men have your age. And I go, I'm doing what I love.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got men in my life that just make all that possible. I know my background is marriage and family therapy. So for a lot of my career as a therapist, I was working with couples and families until I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, and it shifted to where I just work with men now. But I used to tell couples when they walked in my office, I'd tell them, both the man and the woman, the best thing you can both do for your relationship is to have good same-sex friends. Women usually hang on to their friends when they get into a relationship. Men tend to lose their friends when they get in a relationship because we get kind of wrapped up in our partner and all that involves, especially if we then have kids. So men have to have those good relationships for many reasons, both relationship, work, career. My dog's growling behind me. I might have to let her out in just a second. So I'm a big fan of any work we do with men.
If and I may be misquoting this from the book, and something that really really stood out to me is when guys talk about being in toxic relationships, and I think that you say to them, just remember there isn't ever one toxic person in a toxic relationship, and making them realize that there's they're a part of that, they're contributing to it. It's not just hers. She doesn't want to have sex. She's like this. She's mad. Blah 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 blah, and turning a lens on themselves. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, as I said, my training education is in marriage and family therapy. And the model for most marital therapists, relationship therapists, is called systems theory. And the model is divergent from kind of the psychological model that says you have what's called an identified patient, the IP. This person has a problem. Mom and dad are bringing Junior into therapy because Junior has a problem. Junior, won't quit hitting his sister. Junior won't, do his schoolwork. So that's identified patient, or this person's depressed, or this person, has a sexual disorder. That's a medical model brought into the psychological world. Systems theory says that everybody, all the adults within a system, have unconsciously or consciously co-created a system that works for everybody involved. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. Now that can be a real breakthrough, and it's a powerful way to help couples that are struggling with something relationally. Because I promise you, you probably have had this experience. I still have this experience. I just think, well, if my wife was just different, I'd be happy, or if my buddy would quit doing that, we'd be, the best of friends. It is so easy to look at the other person and say, well, if they just changed, everything would work well for me. Now, it's a very different experience when you say, why did I co-create this particular system? What do I do to sustain the dynamics happening in this system? What is the payoff for me? Why do I need it to be that way? Why do I invite this person into my life? Why do I stay with this person? Why do I keep, reinforcing the very behaviors I don't want? So if a couple, for example, can walk into a therapist's office and he or she reframe the experience, well, you're two adults. You've co-created this system. What purpose does it serve? A really good book that I enjoy. It's kind of a shotgun approach to a lot of stuff, but it's called Existential Kink, and it takes a Jungian approach. And she quotes Carl Jung, says, "Having is evidence of wanting." So if you have something in your life, you unconsciously invited it into your life because it serves a purpose at an unconscious level. Now, it's a different model than systems model, but it's kind of saying the same thing. Whatever is here, we invited here. I'll give you an example. On a call I did yesterday for my men's program, I had a guest speaker, Connor Beaton, who's written a book called Men's Work. And I've known Connor for several years. Just a great guy. And he was a guest on the call, and I was interviewing him, and we opened it up for Q&A. And a guy asked Connor, he says, what do you do when your girlfriend or your partner, I think he said, won't get all the way in? He kind of talked a little bit around that, and she just won't make, full commitment, just won't, and Connor kind of asked him, well, what do you mean? What does that look like that she won't get all the way in? Well, she just, is hesitant about it. And I'm still not even clear exactly what he was trying to describe. And, I had him on a clock, a 2-minute clock. So Connor had to give a pretty quick answer. And he said, well, it sounds like she may have, attachment issues and might be an avoidant attachment and, this and that. And so, but still the focus was on her. Why won't she get all the way in? And then after Connor finished, before we moved on to the next person, I said, and one other piece you may consider is what does it say about your attachment style and needs that you invited a person who won't get all the way in to be in a relationship? And I quoted David Data, something I heard David say in a workshop years ago. He said, choose a woman who chooses you. And I asked the guy, so why have you chosen a woman who isn't choosing you? And why do you keep trying to get a woman who doesn't choose you to choose you? What is your story in that? Now, I think that's actually a lot more informative and helpful than trying to figure out why won't my partner get all the way in. Right? So if we can do that, and it's not about blame, it's not about who's wrong, who's broken. I mean, we're all carrying baggage around from childhood. We all have defense mechanisms. We all have our armor up. We all have our offensive weaponry. We all do. And everybody's trying to get close, or at least we think we're trying to get close. Well, it's kind of like, let's get close, but let's keep each other like this. So everything going on in these adult systems, children don't have power, so that we don't count them as co-creating the systems. They're reacting to the systems. So it finds more helpful ways through the systems. Like, for example, when my wife and I have certain patterns that we get into, I say, well, if she didn't have that pattern, I wouldn't be reacting like this. And I go, well, I guess maybe I invited her into my life because she does have that pattern, and it's a pattern I need to work on, because if I'm still getting triggered, it's still in my nervous system. So, dear, I love you, bring it. Instead of saying, you need to change, you need to stop doing that, which I've done. I mean, I've told her that. You need to get help with that. Instead, I say, don't change a thing about you. Keep being exactly who you are. I love you who you are. I'm going to work on my reactions to who you are because that's my work. Because if she quit being who she is, I'd have to go find someone else to do that work with, right? So you get to welcome all that stuff in your life as okay, whether Jungian having is evidence of wanting, or I unconsciously co-created familiar systems, or I've got karmic work to do and I chose this person to help me work through my karmic bag. Well, however we want to look at it, if we actually can just shift our view that the people we're with are there because we chose them at some level, okay, let's do the work.
Okay. So on that note, how would you suggest someone finds that line between, what you just explained, like I'm
Yeah.
here and I'm doing the work with someone, versus knowing when to exit?
Okay, that's a good question. Um, it's a really good question because most of the books you read out there on men for men don't tell you that, right? For example, I love David Data's The Way of the Superior Man. Lots of good material. I've done workshops with Data. Uh, my coach I've had for the last 6 years studied with Data for years. They're close. And in that kind of world, it's like, oh, when your woman is doing XYZ, just open, just hold space. And whenever I get the chance, if somebody asks my opinion on them, I basically said, you know, I'm a therapist, I'm a coach, but I'm not my wife's therapist and coach, right? And I'm not a trauma therapist, so I'm not going to be my wife's trauma therapist. But kind of in this kind of yogic world that I've been in, it's kind of like, and I've often said, from reading Way of the Superior Man, I love the book, like I said, but it almost glorifies and encourages what I call bad female behavior. And I remember having a conversation with my own coach early on around boundaries, and he goes, "No, I don't believe in boundaries. People weaponize boundaries." And I go, "Yeah, I was married to a woman who weaponized the truth. Does that mean we're gonna avoid being truthful?" Um, and then he kind of came around and said, "Yeah, we need limits and we need boundaries." So here's the deal: I don't let anybody treat me badly. I made that commitment 20 plus years ago. And it led to the end of a marriage because I was not being treated well. So there's a difference between who we invite into our life to co-create, working through these things and being treated badly. And that's where boundaries come in. And I
Mm.
remember first session, I mentioned the woman therapist that I worked with years ago. First session I had, she put a string on the ground and walked me through a physical exercise around boundaries. Okay, I was in my mid 30s, in my second marriage. I already had a PhD in marriage and family therapy. I'd never heard of boundaries. I'd never heard of them, right? Parents don't teach them to children. They don't teach children. All right, if I'm treating you badly, son, just call a timeout and say, "Dad, let's chat about this for a little bit." That hurts. We're not taught. We're all starting out in this world small, and the big people get to do whatever they want to the little people in this world, right? So we never learn about boundaries, and so boundaries are our ability to decide who gets to come into our space, what they get to do while they're in there, how long they get to stay, how close they get to get, when it's time for them to leave. And we mature adults do that with everybody in every context. We're asking ourselves, do I want to be here? Does this serve me? Is their behavior acceptable to me? How close do I want to get them? Now, the paradoxical thing, boundaries are not about keeping people away from us. Because if we don't have boundaries, we will either avoid people altogether or we'll build walls to keep them at a distance. Boundaries actually let people get close to us because we're consciously deciding who we let in, how long they get to stay there, what they get to do while they're there, when it's time for them to leave. We are adults, so we get to decide that. So we actually now can let people get close to us, knowing that if we let them get close, we don't have to put up with whatever it is they bring. So, for like with my wife, the things she does that trigger me are not abusive. They're not mean. They're not hurtful. She just has her own abuse issues from childhood. I mean, she grew up 8 out of 10 kids in poverty in Guadalajara, Mexico. You live in Latin America, you probably see the world that people grow up in. and they're powerless, and they're abused and violated by everybody around them. Okay, so she's got her baggage. She's still loving, open-hearted, generous, funny, intelligent, and treats me like gold. But she has patterns due to her own, armoring up, and I'm not going to let anybody get close. I know you're going to leave me, so I'm going to push you away before you can leave me. She has her own patterns that are not abusive to me. She doesn't call me names. She doesn't attack me. She doesn't physically strike out at me. She just triggers me. She activates my nervous system. So I don't need to set a boundary. And boundaries aren't about getting other people to be different. They're about getting me to be different. So, like, if she's clammed up and quiet, and I go, E order K. She taught me to say that. E order K. What now? And she goes, you were looking at that woman's ass. And I'm going, what woman? Why didn't you point her out if you thought I was looking at her ass? I don't even know, and then I get emotionally triggered. All right. The boundary is not that she's got to quit getting triggered because she thought I looked at a woman's ass. My boundary is that if she's not treating me disrespectfully or mean, my boundary is I just need to learn to soothe myself when somebody has a misperception about me. And so it puts it back on us. And I tell people the ultimate power we have to set a boundary is the willingness and ability to remove ourselves from the context. Children usually cannot remove themselves from a toxic, painful, abusive situation. Often that removing ourselves might just be saying, let's talk about this later. Or I'm going to get off the phone now. Call me back when you're in a better mood. It might just mean, I'm going to go for a walk. It may mean completely removing ourselves. If somebody is being abusive, if they're being physically abusive, if they're calling us names, if they're being demeaning to us, if they're lying to us, if their addiction is, we may need to remove ourselves from that situation instead of waiting for them to change. So in terms of the boundaries, I just encourage people to think about, all right, I'm an adult. Who am I letting into my life? What do they get to do? When do I need to say stop or later or not now? Or if you do that again, we're done. We take responsibility for that. Now, we often need coach, therapists. We need usually help with this because none of us know how to set boundaries because we didn't learn and there's not very many good role models out there for it. So a lot of times guys will come to me, they'll say, well, let me see if I can think of an example. How can I set a boundary with my wife about looking, she looks at social media. I go, well, you don't, she can look at social media. She's an adult. You're about, how can here's a classic. How can I set a boundary with my wife that she has to have sex with me more regularly? I go, I don't know. Yeah, I can't tell you, go get a gun and hold it to her head. That we can't do that. So the boundaries are not about getting them to be different. They're about getting us to be different. And so again, often we need help in sorting out what am I trying to, if they just quit doing that, or if they started doing that, I'd be okay, versus why did I pick this person and why have I co-created this system that now seems to be frustrating me? Then we actually can start getting insight and awareness and doing some work. Sure.
Yeah.
So that was a lot on boundaries. I don't know if
No,
that's
it's
as deep
perfect.
as you
No, I
want
think
to go.
that is, yeah, I think it's really the main thing I took from your book I reread it like 6 months ago. And at the end, you have kind of like these highlight lists, and you said you don't let people treat you poorly, or don't let people treat you badly. And it's just, we live in such a world, and like biblical as well, is like forgiveness, and you have to forgive everyone, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like I didn't realize that I was actually having a hard time when people treated me poorly, is actually just saying no and enough,
No.
not saying no and then revisiting it and letting that relationship continue. And it actually cost me my best friend at the time, and it was like really, really sad. And I was like, I'm really glad that I was reading your book while there was some stuff going on. Unfortunately, I was like, you know what, this is my line in the sand, and this is about me. It's not about what he's doing, and just didn't let that continue.
And the line in the sand, a lot of times people don't know they're crossing our boundaries. There are some people out there who I call professional boundary invaders. Many nice guys had one or more parents who were professional boundary invaders. They believe they should be able to do whatever they want, and you shouldn't ever. But a lot of times people just don't know they've gotten in our space and done something that was hurtful to us, and we don't tell them. We let it build up until, we either withdraw from them or overreact to some minor little thing they did. So boundaries are actually really loving, because if
Mm.
we say, don't do that, please. You asked me at the beginning of the call, what do I want to be called? And you said, Rob, Bob, and I said, Robert would be great. That was a boundary. If I never told you I wanted to be called Robert and you kept calling me Rob, I go, how come he keeps calling me Rob? It pisses me off when he calls me Rob. But if I never tell you I prefer to be called Robert, that's not on you. It's not your fault.
Mm.
So oftentimes it's just a matter of saying, that hurts, or I don't like that. In fact, a little trick. I'll share this little hack with your listeners. This sounds so simple, but it is really powerful, because usually when somebody gets into our space and does something that hurts us, like I said, we either withdraw from them completely, keep it in until we blow up or get passive aggressive, attack them. But this really kind of elegant little hack that if somebody does something, and if we notice a reaction in our nervous system, maybe it hurts, it feels dismissive. I know it's not a feeling, or it felt condescending. Again, I know it's not a feeling, but we're trying to put some words to, out. That was a jolt to my nervous system. And what you do is you begin with ouch, kind of in a real kind of, most people aren't expecting someone to begin a sentence with ouch. Ouch, that hurt. Did you mean it to? Or ouch, that felt dismissive. Did you mean it to? Or ouch, that felt condescending. Did you mean it to? Now, your ouch is you're showing them I'm in pain, right? Without lashing out from our pain, and then we're saying how we received it. That felt hurtful. That felt dismissive. That felt condescending. Whatever we fill in the blank with, and then the question: did you mean it to? Now, usually, if somebody does something, and go, you were an asshole to me, or you did that on purpose, or you're always being a jerk, or most people don't respond well to that. Most people get defensive, right? But if you said, "Ouch, that hurt," did you mean it to? You're actually, what I say is you're raising everybody's consciousness.
Mm.
You're raising your consciousness, in that you're actually identifying what you feel and your experience. You're raising the other person's consciousness that they did something that felt hurtful to you. Okay. So if you say, ouch, that hurt, did you mean it to? There's no accusation in that. It's a question. It's not accusation. It's just, did you mean it to? Now the person has to get conscious. They may go, no, man, I'm sorry. I had no idea that was hurtful. My apologies.
Mm.
So now all of a sudden, that thing was hurtful to me. And, that might become a pattern over time, that I'm highly sensitive to everything that you do. And you may go, I don't like hanging around Robert. Every other sentence he goes, ouch, that hurt. Did you mean it to? So you might after a while go, okay, enough of that. But if it's like something that you didn't know, if you cared about me, even if I was a stranger, you'd want to know if you did something that was hurtful, then you can process, well, is that theirs, or is that something I just need to be more conscious of? So you may say, no, my apologies. No idea that was hurtful to you. I'll pay more attention.
Mm.
Or you might say, I didn't mean to hurt you, but I'm actually kind of surprised why it did hurt you. You might explore that. The person you may say, you know what? Actually, I've been pissed off at you for a while. There's been this thing, I was bugged about, but I never said anything. So, maybe I did mean to hurt you. Maybe I was being passive aggressive. Sometimes we do, right? We're packing something around. I heard a quote, somebody shared a quote with me from Neil Strauss the other day, and it was, unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. Hey, how come you've been calling me Rob all along? Well, I never said anything. Now all of a sudden I'm gonna, be. So you may realize, oh, I was being passive aggressive when I did that roundabout passive aggressive hurtful thing. Now, if I say to you, ouch, that hurt. Did you mean it to? And you go, you're such a fucking crybaby. Man up, get the fuck over it. Wah, wah, wah. You know what? I'll probably quit hanging out with you, because that is usually the response of what I call the professional boundary invaders. They feel like they are being attacked if you set a boundary with them. And went through that with my mother about 30 years ago. And, every time I set a boundary, as I started learning about them, she felt attacked and she would just attack the boundaries. So I didn't talk to my mother for 15 years. Took that. I mean, we're close now, but we had to learn how to have a boundary relationship. But yeah, she went on the attack every time I set a boundary. Those kind of people, I suggest remove yourself from.
That's what I was going to ask you, because that is actually the relationship that my brother and I have with our mother. And so I've tried, mum and I have gone to therapy recently and whatnot, and it just feels like it's done nothing. Like I'm like, I set a boundary, she crosses it. Set a boundary, she crosses it. And I'm just like, I just feel like I'm back in this state of like, wow, I don't like you again. And it was like, I really, and it just like, it feels like there's also this obligation. Could you be able to speak to that? Because I feel
Yeah.
so obligated, my brother more so, of like, we have to, because of how we were raised and how she raised us as a single mum, is like there's just huge, like, it's our job
Yeah.
to do XYZ.
What you're referring to is called emotional fusion, and it's another dynamic that a really good book I'll recommend. It's a book called Passionate Marriage by Dr. David Snarch, and he talks a lot about fusion and differentiation. And I won't go into the background of where that information comes from, but what happens in all emotional systems? Anytime you've got a tribe animal, pack animal, herd animal, flock animal, animals in those systems. You heard my dog barking a little bit earlier. She's got systems in her that react to things that feel like threat or anxiety or even good things. Right? There's a communication system. In humans, in the brain, they're called mirror neurons, and apparently a lot of animals have them as well. So what happens is when we're dependent on a pack, a tribe, a herd, we transmit anxiety states. We also can transmit calm states.
Mm.
So, example you might see if a bunch of birds are on a line and one gets startled, they all go into startle response, even if they didn't get startled, because that's communicated. They've done studies with mothers and babies of how mothers can communicate anxiety states to babies and how they can, communicate calm states, usually through eye contact. Right? So eyes are very powerful in terms of the communication process. So in all of these states, and we're tribe animals, our ancestors needed tribe to survive, right? We survived together, we died together, right? We were interdependent on each other. Now that leads to fusion. We do need each other. Now it's different than that borrowed functioning that I was talking about earlier. Interdependency is we need each other to make it through this, right? There's still a self here, but we need each other. Now in fused systems, there often is some giving up of self for the well-being of that system. Okay, so our tribal ancestors were, everything was shared. They hunted, they gathered, and whatever they hunted and gathered, one person didn't hoard it all. Everything was shared, whether you went out and hunted and gathered or not. You had some other responsibility. Everything was shared. Okay, that's part of a fused system. Now, how this develops, beyond just needing that to survive, we don't need that so much anymore. And the way our economy is built, you can actually probably get along all by yourself. Right? But there's that emotional component that is in there that you give up part of you for even the emotional well-being of others. It's kind of like if you ever watched Star Trek Next Generation and the concept of the Borg. The Matrix would be a similar kind, where you basically give up all of you for the survival of the Matrix, right? So this emotional fusion has been being passed on through tribes, culture, church, religion, and families for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years in terms of just our tribal ancestry. So you had to give up some of you for the benefit of being taken care of by the tribe, right? And so whatever you gave up had a payoff. You were well taken care of by being in that tribe. If you were outside the tribe, you didn't have to give up anything of you, but you probably wouldn't live very long, and you wouldn't pass on your DNA very well. So there's value to that in conscious context. In unconscious context, how this usually happens in families is the most powerful people in the family, which are usually, believe it or not, the most anxious people in the family. Oh, I got confetti coming down the riverside. I did my hands like that and confetti came. I love how technology does those things for us. I was on a call talking about the death of my father on Zoom a few months ago, and balloons started going up behind me when I lifted my hands. So anyway, what do you do? We smile at it. So in emotional fusion, the most powerless people have to give up themselves to the control of the more powerful people, which are, again, usually the most anxious people because they're afraid of being abandoned, of being left, of not having their resources. Religion tends to be highly fused. Most families, especially Asian families, Indian families, families in China, highly fused. And Indian families, dudes still get their marriages arranged for them. Their parents still tell them where they're going to go to school, what kind of degree they're going to get, what kind of job they're going to have. They have to. Indian men will tell me all the time, everything the hoops they go through to please their parents, and then because now that I went to MIT, got my degree in medicine or engineering, and I teach at Stanford, or I'm a heart surgeon, my parents now expect to be able to retire, and I take care of them. And every Indian man I've ever asked that, I said, what age do your parents expect to retire and you take care of them? Oh, about 45. I go, really? Yeah. So that's fusion. And that's hard to break out of because if your whole culture is steeped in it, your family is steeped in it, you've got to give up you for the benefit of everybody else. And that's why we don't have boundaries. Boundaries don't tend to exist in fused emotional systems. Fused emotional systems is you think like we think, feel like we feel, do what we tell you to, believe in the same God we believe in, vote like we vote, have the same desires. So there's very little passion because passion is scary to fused systems. I want to go be a musician. No, you're going to be a doctor. No, I want to play guitar in a rock band. You're going to be a doctor, right? Because I need you to be a doctor so I can brag to all my friends and family that you're a doctor, right? So that's fusion. We have to give up ourselves. Now that happens in pretty much every family system. An exception to it is a disengaged family where you grow up as if nobody ever even knew you existed, right? There's families like that, but more common is the fused system. You give up everything for the survival of the most anxious people. Okay, you go through adolescence, you're trying to differentiate as healthy. Even at 2 years old, your brain got wired enough to start saying me, myself, I want. And what do we call that phase in Western culture? Actually, it's called this all over the world. You know what we call that? The terrible twos. You've heard that term, right?
Yes,
The
definitely.
2-year-old. So I want, I'm gonna. And we call it terrible twos because the child is differentiating from the wishes and the desires of the big people who want it done their way. So they usually win. But so children, when they can't differentiate, they have to do one of two things. They either become oppositionally defiant, they just push back on everything, right? And these are usually the kids that around early adolescence just start fucking everything up, getting kicked out of school, getting in fights, doing drugs, alcohol, dropping out of school. The other kid, which I see both patterns in nice guys actually, but the other pattern is where you just become fused. You go along to get along. You go underground with your needs, your wants, your desires, your thoughts, and you just mom, dad, yeah, and then go do what you want to do when they're not looking. But you look. There's the good child.
That
And
was
the other,
both of me. Ben was like got expelled from both schools. I
I
was
saw you
saying
smile.
yes. I was saying yes, and I was also selling drugs. We were both doing that function, except
Yeah.
he was like, I don't give a fuck, and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'm the golden child, and then I do everything bad in the background.
You're what I call in the book the I'm so good nice guy. Your brother took that route of I'm so bad. And usually if I've watched family systems for so long, often if a guy tells me, yeah, I was so good, I did everything right. I was the captain. I made straight A's. I said, do you have a brother? Oh yeah, he was the black sheep. He got kicked out of school. He did drugs. Fused systems always need to create one or the other because you're not going to compete. Usually, you won't compete with who's the biggest fuck up. And if he can't compete with you, but being the biggest suck up, he won't try.
Right.
Okay, so but both of you never differentiated. You didn't break out of the fusion. You may have tried to be good, and by being good, make everything right. Hey, I'm going to go to therapy with mom. That's a good thing to do, right? Your brother, on the other hand, might have just, cut off his nose to spite his face. You tell me not to drink, I'm going to drink more. You tell me to, get my grades up, I'm going to drop out of school. You tell me I got to, worship your religion. Fuck that. I'm an atheist. I'm a Hindu now. I'm a Buddhist. I'll show you. Is the just pushback on everything. But there's neither of those is there true differentiation. And my definition of differentiation is the ability to ask yourself, what do you want? What feels right to you? There's one. And then two, to follow through on that, even if you feel neurotic guilt or anxiety or resistance from those systems outside of you to change back. Now, neurotic guilt is always a product of fused emotional systems.
Oh, dude, I can't, like, my whole, anything to do with my mother, and same for Ben, is so much guilt. Like, we feel so guilty about just everything.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't feel like she came here, she came over for Christmas, because I hadn't seen her for 7 years. Like, I moved away, out of Australia.
There's a reason you moved away. I'm going to Australia, Mom. I'll see you later.
And then I don't get anxious. I'm very confident, whatever. I'm very confident in my own life, and like sometimes I feel nervous or whatever, but I couldn't sleep for 3 nights before she got here. And I was just like, wow, I don't think this has ever happened to me in my life. Like, I was riddled with anxiety, and I was just like lying about, I couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
And I was like freaking out about her re-entering my life as a 30-year-old man.
I'll tell you a secret. That anxiety you felt in that moment is the anxiety that was a constant companion to you when you were a few weeks, few months, and a few years old. You just learned to try to manage it. Okay. And I promise you, if you felt it now, you felt it before. Just always keep that in mind. If you feel anything that's really strong today, you felt it when you were young.
I bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless maybe it's fear of death, but maybe even we felt that young. So yeah, as children, culturally, familially, religiously, we are taught sacrifice you because they're big and they're telling you what to do. Now, I've read theories that one of the reasons that humans evolved, as rapidly as we did to the state that we are, is because of a tension between both our need for connection and community. I mean, is powerful in humans. We need it. We need tribe. And a drive for independence, for self-identity. Right? Those seem like two contradictory, warring, and they can be contradictory and at war. But think even how much more powerful that tension is that within a state of tension, of need and desire to connect, there's also this desire to be a self, to be self-guiding, you self-deciding, what do you want? And again, most cultures don't teach how do we deal, but that tension's there, whether we name it or not. Most cultural systems push towards the fusion because that lets the powers that be control everybody else. And that's what government's about. It's what most religions are about. And it's what most families are about, is maintaining some sense of control for those who need to be in control. And the little people that come along, well, let's introduce sin, devil, eternal punishment, casting out of the tribe. We'll keep them scared. We'll keep them small. We'll keep them fearful and anxious. Then they'll stick around and do what we want. So when neurotic guilt, there's guilt, neurotic guilt. There's healthy guilt that if you violate your own internal moral code, not somebody else's, not the one you were given by your church or your family or your culture, but your own. And as a mature person who has their own moral code. So if you violate your moral, if you think it's wrong for me to lie and you tell a lie, you should feel guilty. If you think powerful people should not use their power to hurt less powerful people and you hurt somebody who has less power than you, you should feel guilty because you violated your own moral code. Now, when we violate our own moral code, that should lead to a few things. One, a sense of awareness. Maybe we go make atonement, make amends, and hopefully a change of behavior that gets us aligned with our moral code. So that's healthy guilt. It's a good thing. Okay? Neurotic guilt, on the other hand, is when you feel the same things, guilty, but you haven't violated your own moral code. You feel guilty because you're breaking the rules of a fused emotional system that have been, pounded into you since, you could breathe. And now you feel like you're doing something wrong because you didn't call mom when mom wanted you. You don't want to call mom every Sunday, but you better, because she's going to be so upset at you if you don't. You didn't want to sacrifice you to make sure mom's okay, but you did it anyway. And then when you don't sacrifice you, when you don't talk to mom for 7 years, you have those pangs of guilt. But that's neurotic guilt. Mm-hmm. And it only comes from fused emotional systems. It doesn't come from anywhere else. So whenever you find yourself feeling guilty, check in. Am I feeling this guilt, this anxiety, this fear because I violated my own internal code of ethics, or because I'm breaking some other rule that's, I've been packing around with me since infancy and childhood that says don't upset the powers that be? Mm-hmm. Whole different dynamic.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm aware that it is not my own moral code, but it still affects me like I could not believe, and I'm just like, I feel like a completely different person. Yeah. It's freaking wild.
And that, because when I was talking earlier about, when my wife gets a look on her face or just her body language, it triggers something deep in my nervous system. Mm. That was your nervous system trigger. It's deep in your emotional operating system. Yeah. It probably doesn't have words. It doesn't have picture memory to go with it. It's just emotional memory stored up in a real primitive part of your brain down in the brainstem called the amygdala. That's where, when children, before our brains wired up enough to store memory, to store words, to talk, it all goes into the amygdala, and that becomes our operating system. It's the machine language of the human mind and the human body. So if you can be the watcher of those states when they come up and go, whoa, this is interesting. The more you can just be curious about those states, the more you can process them, move through them, get the help you need to, work through that old stuff. Invite people in your life that will trigger those things for you so you can work through them, that kind of thing.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. So I'd love to, on the same vein as the question I asked you earlier about, how to have someone, which is, when do you decide to exit someone from your life or take them out of your life? We talk a bit about authenticity. And I see guys get really, in this space, they start to learn about authenticity. Like, I'm going to be my authentic self. And they just kind of go a bit crazy. And
it can happen.
Like, how have you helped guys find the line between being their authentic self and also getting the things that they want? Because sometimes I also see guys who are like, oh, well, this is who I am. And they just continue to shut down more and being more of a nice guy or something like that. And so it's hard to differentiate between those two.
Yeah. Again, we men, but especially we nice guy males, really want everything to just be kind of nice and cut and dry. Guys will come to me, Robert, I read your book. I'm a nice guy. Give me a plan. How long is this going to take? It's kind of basically, show me how to line up the ones and zeros. I'll get the ones and zeros lined up. The machine's going to work right, and it'll keep working right forever. That's just the male brain. That's how we think. It's okay. Reality is, this shit's messy. Right? It's messy. That's why I tell guys, don't try to do it alone. You didn't become a nice guy in social isolation. Don't try to break free, in social isolation. We need help. It's helpful to have people who've been through this mess. I've done all that messy stuff. I tell guys, No More Mr. Nice Guy is not a chronicle of my successes. It's a record of my fuck-ups. It's everything that I tried that didn't work so well, and then I put that in a book, right? And people go, oh, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. I can relate to that. So again, don't try to do this alone, because we need the guidance. So in No More Mr. Nice Guy, I talk, going back to the boundary subject just briefly. I talk in there that when most people start learning about boundaries and they get, oh, I can say no, I can say stop, I can say, if you ever do that again, we're done. All of a sudden they become what I call kamikaze boundary setters, right? And they pull out the chainsaw, when just a fly swatter might do the job, right? So, but I say that's normal. It's okay. It's all right. It's normal. you're probably going, if you've been at this end of the spectrum and all of a sudden you go, no more Mr. Nice Guy, all of a sudden you're probably going to err, the other end of the spectrum. You might become a total asshole. It could happen, right? It has happened. And guys say, I set my boundary. I go, it sounded like you were a total dick, actually. Well, but I set a boundary. So here's the thing. Men, a real common question, a statement in the form, a question in the form of a statement in the form of a question. Guys will say, Robert, okay, I've read your book, I've listened to your podcast, but they've gotten introduced to what I talk about being what I call an integrated man, an authentic man, somebody that's true to ourselves, that is comfortable with every aspect of me. I don't need to hide it, nothing hidden, nothing half-assed. And the guys will say, all right, I realize that being, kind of the wussy doormat, the nice guy over here on this end of the spectrum, that's not working, but I don't want to become the asshole jerk. Where's the happy medium? And I go, there is not one. Because I think both the wussy doormat, the nice guy, the asshole jerk, I think they're actually just two ends of the same continuum that they're trying to manage their anxiety and their shame. The nice guy manages anxiety and shame. Both are in fight, flight, freeze. The nice guy's in flight and freeze and fawn. I'll hide, I'll make things better, blah, blah, blah. That's how they're handling anxiety and shame and stress. Whereas the asshole jerk is still in the state of anxiety, shame, and stress, but they're in fight mode. They're the jerk. They just rumble right over people. So I tell men, I don't know where the tipping point is between two dysfunctional extremes of the same dynamic. So it's not like we just have to learn to be a little bit less nice or a little bit more assholey. What we have to do is we need to go to another plane, a different order. And in this different order involves things like differentiation, asking ourselves, what do we want? It involves more of a consciousness of being that watcher, that observer, that noticer. It often involves self-soothing, where we learn to soothe and calm our anxiety states. It usually involves, getting connected with other people. It usually involves learning how to be more honest. So there's a lot of processes that aren't about how do I just get more in the middle of these, is how do I move up out of the anxiety and shame states that dictated this right here. So I have to go back and try to remember exactly what was the question. How do you not go to the extremes? Okay, yeah, it's easy to go, well, I'll just be more assholey. I'll be more of a jerk. I'll have a shorter fuse. That's not the answer. The answer is, how do I be more aware? How do I be more self-differentiated? How do I be more boundaried? How do I soothe myself more? Learning to soothe ourselves is so key to so many of these things. And I know when I wrote No More Mr. Nice Guy, I pretty much focused on the shame dynamic underpinning nice guy syndrome. By the time the book I'd finished writing, it was on its way to get published, I was really tuning in a lot as well to the anxiety dynamic. And I remember in my men's groups that I was leading, almost every group, somebody say, Robert, can we talk about that self-soothing thing again? Because so much of our reaction is triggered by anxiety states. And if we can just even soothe our anxiety. So if I can just teach guys, okay, put both feet on the ground, sit up straight, and let's take 3 nice, easy, diaphragmatic breaths. Breathe into your belly, relax into your body, be grounded, be present. All of a sudden, everything changes. In 3 breaths, everything can change. So to how do we not go from being this passive wussy, you can walk all over me, to, I got the chainsaw out and don't you dare do that again, is often the breath that allows us to make that difference. You maybe the quote, the exact quote slipping my mind, but basically between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our power to choose. And in that choice lies our freedom, I think freedom and power. Breath, just calming, learning to soothe ourselves, allows us to make different choices. We'll be up here rather than just going that direction. And again, doing this work with other men, it's just, even without me being able to say, well, here's why doing it with men makes it so different. But the truth is, we need masculine tribe. We need masculine initiation. Most of us have not had that. So being with men gives us those skill sets, whether it's that, and to me, I define initiation as getting comfortable feeling uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So that means if we can soothe ourselves, ground ourselves, take powerful action, do it as part of a team, not by ourselves, all of that stuff lets us live more powerfully and less reactively. So
Yeah.
again, maybe a lot longer question answer than what you were looking for. But yeah, I'll just say it again. It is normal to typically swing the pendulum and overreact when you've been underreactive much of your life.
Yeah. On that same vein, there's in the red pill community, like guys will talk about red pill rage, and it's like when they see the truth, they like fuck women, I hate women, they're
Yeah.
toxic, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Like, why? What do you think causes that reaction? And because that some of that community is quite extreme. So I'm like, but what do you think causes that
Yeah,
reaction to guys?
and there's stuff out in red pill. I go, yeah, that makes sense. That's actually a lot of like what I talk about. And there's some that go, oh man, that's pretty paranoid, pretty hateful, towards women. And I'll just say that the main thing that triggers me most about red pill is putting men into hierarchies. It's kind of like we're red pill. We've seen the Matrix. Those average frustrated chumps, those beta, those blue pills. You know, I'm not a fan of hating on women, but I'm really not a fan of hating on other men.
Mhm.
And, because I'm sitting in my mother's basement writing on a forum, I'm red pill. Those other chumps are blue pill. I don't like that at all. So I'm not a fan of that. Um, but that rage, it makes sense. If we've grown up in these fused emotional systems, if we've sacrificed self thinking that will get us approval and validation, if we've lived by what I call covert contracts that I talk about in No More Mr. Nice Guy, if I'm a good guy, you'll like me and love me, it's a covert contract. If I meet your needs without you having to ask, then you will meet my needs without me having to ask. That's a covert contract. If I do everything right, then I'll have a smooth, problem-free life. That's a covert contract. None of them work. They're all unconscious. Nobody else out there knows there's a contract, that they're supposed to be giving something back. So all of a sudden, for example, when you figure out I've been living by these covert contracts. I've been thinking if I gave more than I got, people would love me, like me, and I'd get laid more. And then all of a sudden you go, fuck, I was told a lie. I believed a lie. That's all been wrong. And I've been believing and living this way for X number of years. There is a tendency to get pissed off about that. And when we get pissed off, it's got to be somebody else's fault, right? And if a guy's been hurt by women, either because he can't get women to pay any attention to him, and so he's never been laid or never had a girlfriend, never had the joy of being in a toxic relationship or going through a messy breakup, right? If they've never had that joyful experience, that it's got to be women's fault. Or if they were in a relationship and a woman cheated on them, or a woman brought her trauma issues into the relationship and dumped them on the guy. Yeah, it's their fault. I'm not happy. I don't have love. I don't have regular sex because it's their fault. But then what the red pill, in my version of it, tries to do is, all right, we'll game the system. We'll game women. We'll use this psychology. We'll basically manipulate them to get our basic need, usually of sexual access, without giving up anything to them whatsoever, with no degree of commitment or open-heartedness, and just fuck them because they're all hypergamous anyway, and they're just going to trade up to the next richer guy. So blah blah blah, and all of a sudden we got this war, we got this battle, and you know what? I don't want to walk through life thinking anybody or any class of people are out to get me and causing my personal misery. That's not going to liberate me. That's not going to make me happy. So if you watch a lot of red pill guys, they're not necessarily really happy either.
Mm.
And actually, most of them aren't even that good at spinning plates and getting all the high quality women, which is red pill speak for young and hot. The high quality women, to come let them, be non-monogamous and fuck as many as they want, while the woman is just so happy to have them because they're a high quality guy. In theory, it's one thing. In practice,
Yeah.
I don't see it happening all that much. And every red pill leader I know is married, for goodness sakes. So, but
Yeah.
okay, what was your question?
That answered my question. No, that was my
Did
question.
it? Did it answer your question?
Yeah, 100%.
So anything that makes it is us against them, they're doing this to me, doesn't set us free. It just keeps triggering. It just puts us further into those covert contracts. I did this. They should be doing that. I was a good guy. She should want to sleep with me.
Yeah, it actually just seems like it puts you further into, that toxic side of it. It puts you further into the situation that you're trying to escape from in the first place.
You know, and again, yeah, I know. Like Jordan Peterson's been attacked for kind of having empathy and sympathy for like incels and MGTOW, and he goes, I really do. I said, I think they could do all this stuff more effectively. Um, but in some ways, you got to have some degree of, yeah. I understand. I understand why
Oh,
you say
100%.
no more women. I'm not putting up with all that drama anymore. No more me having to do this to get a woman to like me. No more. I can understand that. And uh, when I didn't set out to write a book. I set out. I just started. I was working on my own nice guy stuff, and as a therapist, a lot of guys were coming to me and saying the same thing I was. I'm a nice guy. I treat my woman well. They probably wouldn't say my woman. I treat my wife well. Treat my girlfriend well. I'm better than her ex. I'm raising her kids. I give her everything she wants. It's never good enough. She's never happy. She never wants to have sex anymore. And I go, man, I can finish their sentences for them. So I started a No More Mr. Nice Guy group. Another. I started writing basically chapters, articles to give them what I was learning. And they kept saying, Robert, you should write a book. You should go on Oprah. This could be a bestseller. A lot of people need this. And so I kept writing. And as these kind of chapters and lessons came together, and I started thinking, well, how do I put this into a book, and make it coherent? And I went through several phases. I would give a lot of people the stuff to read. And a pretty consistent response I kept getting back was, Robert, this is good. And it sounds like you've got a lot of resentment and rage towards women. I thought, doesn't everybody? I just thought that was normal. All the women I knew didn't like other women. I don't trust women. Every woman I've ever had in my life, I don't trust women. I don't let them close to me. I thought everybody had rage and resentment towards women. But I thought, okay, if it's coming through in my writing, I need to both take a look at that, at the writing, but I also need to take a look at my own feeling states. And when I started working on it, I realized I do have resentment and rage towards women, whether it's their entitlement, whether it's how I've let them treat me and I didn't have boundaries, whether it's the power I gave them to fulfill me and make me feel complete, the keys to my sexual, self that I handed over. But, that was all on me. I had to go come to grips with whatever resentment and rage I had towards women, other than when I was helpless towards my mother. Once I reached adolescence on, that was on me. And so once I started taking responsibility for my stuff, I actually still don't hang around women all that much. Just I work a lot. I prefer to be with men. I'm married. I love my wife dearly. I spend time with my mother. I spend time with my stepdaughter, my granddaughter. Other than that, I'm not around a lot of women. It's kind of like that's enough feminine energy. Oh, Nala, my pit bull. Yeah, that's enough feminine energy. I'd rather invest the rest of my energy with men. And so, but that also let me let go of any residual resentment, rage. Oh, I've been done too. I've been a victim by women. Because again, that doesn't serve you. It doesn't set you free. And it doesn't get you what you actually wanted all along from women. Go figure. If you're walking around with rage and resentment of women, how fucking attractive does that make you to females? They're going, oh, I want to get with that guy. I can tell he's really pissed off towards women. I'm going to get real close to him. It doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. Well, it does with some women that have their own issues that are actually attracted to that. And there are some women attracted to that. But anyway, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, then you get to have the joy of a toxic relationship.
There you go. Everybody should. Yeah, I would tell guys, listen, everybody should have at least one borderline relationship in their life. You haven't lived till you've been with a borderline.
Amazing. Then one last question, Robert, just before we wrap up. What do you feel like men of today, in particular, like, guys between 25, 35, what do you feel like these guys need to hear right now?
Get the fuck off the internet and social media. Yeah, you're in that age bracket. My son is 38. He hit adolescence about the time we got broadband. So, he grew up, stealing music on Napster and downloading porn and not just my stepson as well, but every boy did. I've been talking more about this lately because I've worked with so many young men, millennials and younger, that grew up in an information age. And so many guys I know are just, they're fucking brilliant. They're geniuses. My son is a sponge for information. You can talk intelligently on many subjects. And a lot of young men I know, men in your generation, just highly informed. But what I also see is it's real easy to almost get addicted to information.
Mm.
I'm gonna go watch more Uberman Lab. I'm gonna go listen to more Tim Ferriss. I'm gonna go, listen to more of this podcast. I'm gonna go watch more YouTube videos. I'm gonna go research this subject. I'm gonna go, do more Wim Hof. I'm gonna go find out, more about, psychedelics. I'm gonna, and again, so many young men I work with are just so well informed beyond the education I got by going to school and getting a PhD. And they're just in this constant more information, more information, more information, and not necessarily, pretty much the primary skill that most young men I work with have is creating click funnels because that's all they've learned on the internet. I'm going to start my own business and build a click funnel. Click funnels are great. I believe in them. I like them. But there's more to life than building click funnels. But because the guys, again, you grew up surrounded by that information, right? And so I was on a call yesterday, and basically, I had two different calls yesterday, and the same question basically came up. Basically, how do you reconcile the information from this source, this source, this source, and this source? Well, one guy said, I just started in recovery. I read your book, Connor Beaton's book, David Data's book, and John Wineland's book. And I go, all good books. I recommend all of them. Pick one and just stick with one. And so there, in Buddhism, there's this concept of just having one teacher, one lineage, and just sticking with going all the way into that. And so what I see for so many young men is, we're bouncing from podcast to podcast to podcast to YouTube channel to YouTube channel to YouTube channel to this, next shiny thing to this next shiny thing to this next shiny, I'm going to be a digital nomad. I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And, again, it's all good. It's all great. Those 4 books that guy recommended, all great. Another guy came on a call and said, well, I'm going to do a feminine cleanse. I said, great. And he said, but, my therapist suggested this thing. I brought it up in one of the groups on your call, and then I'm bringing it up with you. And I go, okay, so you want another, point of view that will now prevent you from actually doing anything on your feminine cleanse because you're trying to reconcile all the various points of view. So I'd say ramp down just time spent gathering information on the internet. And number one thing I tell young men is it won't ever happen. It's not going to happen. I say, get off social media. Get off social media. But I need Meta to, run my business and drive my click funnels. But social media is feminine. Is how many likes can I get? How much drama can I get caught up in? How can I be seen? How can I be noticed? All feminine traits. And I just think so much of social media is toxic, does damage worldwide, and keeps young men stuck in what I call the nursery. Yeah, I can play video games. I can spend my day looking for stuff on the internet. I can be on social media. I can smoke a lot of pot. I can drink a lot. I can look at a lot of porn, and they're not living up to their potential in life. Again, it's hard to give a one. Here's one thing that's going to make everything better, but because so many young men I do know is so easy, you just pick up your phone anytime you want. Here's more information. Here's Instagram. Here's Facebook. Here's X. Here's Here's Uberman. Here's YouTube. Here's
And then you've escaped. It's
you've
like
escaped.
escapism in the fucking with the facade of knowledge.
But look how much I know about cold plunges and Wim Hof breathing. I know look how much I know about psilocybin and microdosing. I just I know a lot, and it's all good information. But how much do we really need to live our best life? Is information becoming the substitute for really living a powerful, kick-ass life? So, again, it's not black and white. It's not either or, but it's worth taking a look at, I think.
What a great place to end it. Thanks, Robert. That was incredible.
Thank you. This was fun.